Imagine having such a terrible taste that you manage to personally offend two different gods in two completely separate instances. First, you showcase your boundless greed to the god of wine. Then you insult the god of music's artistry directly to his face. What's up, everyone? My name is Jason Hamilton, and welcome to Myth HQ. I'm a fantasy author who lives and breathes this kind of stuff, and on this channel we explore the best characters from global mythology. That fool I just described was King Midas, and today we're unpacking the full saga of mythology's unluckiest, or maybe just most foolish, king. Our story, like many good ones, begins with a party that got a little out of hand. Dionysus, the god of wine, revelry, and general chaos, was traveling with his usual entourage of satyrs and nymphs when he noticed someone was missing. His old tutor and foster father, a satyr named Silenus. Silenus was infamous for his wisdom, but even more so for his love of wine. True to form, he had wandered off in a drunken haze, eventually collapsing in the famous rose gardens of King Midas of Phrygia. Some versions of the myth say Midas stumbled upon him by accident, others, a bit more cunning, claim Midas wanted to capture the wise satyr to learn his secrets, so he deliberately spiked a fountain with wine, knowing that Silenus couldn't resist. Either way, Midas found the old satyr, recognized him, and instead of taking him prisoner, treated him like royalty. For 10 days and nights, they feasted and partied. When Silenus was finally sober enough to stand, Midas personally escorted him back to a very grateful Dionysus. Overjoyed to have his mentor back safe, Dionysus offered Midas a reward, any single wish he desired. Gods really need to stop doing this. Without a moment's hesitation, Midas made his profoundly foolish request that everything he touched would turn to solid gold. Dionysus was disappointed, knowing that that was a terrible idea, but a god's promise is a god's promise, so he granted the wish. At first, Midas was ecstatic. He touched a twig and it became a golden branch. He picked up a stone and it turned into a heavy gold nugget. He ran through his palace, turning pillars and doorways into shimmering works of art. He was now without question the richest man in the world. The joy lasted right up until dinner time. When he reached for a slice of bread, it hardened into inedible metal. When he tried to take a sip of wine, it became molten gold on his lips. The richest man in the world was going to starve to death, surrounded by a feast he couldn't eat. Now, you've probably heard the version where he accidentally turns his daughter, often called Marigold, into a golden statue with a hug. It's a powerful and tragic image, but it's not part of the original Greek myth. That story was actually added in the 1850s by the author Nathaniel Hawthorne to make the lesson a little bit more family-friendly and dramatic. In the old myths, it was the simple primal horror of starvation and thirst that broke him. Realizing the curse he'd brought upon himself, Midas prayed to Dionysus, begging for forgiveness and for the gift to be taken away. The god, being a pretty reasonable guy when he wanted to be, took pity on him. He told Midas to travel to the Pactolus River and wash himself at its source. Midas did as he was told, and as he plunged into the water, the golden power flowed out of his body and into the river. From that day on, the sands of the Pactolus were said to be rich with gold, which became the source of wealth for the later kingdom of Lydia. Midas had learned his lesson about greed, but his knack for poor judgment was far from cured. After his brush with gold and starvation, Midas came to hate wealth and riches. He gave up his palace and moved to the countryside to become a worshipper of Pan, the rustic god of the wild. One day, Midas was unlucky enough to witness a musical contest between Pan and the great god Apollo. Pan, arrogant and proud, had boasted that his playing on the simple reed pipes was superior to Apollo's divine music on the lyre. A challenge was made, and the mountain god Tmolus was chosen to be the judge. Pan went first, playing a wild, earthy tune that charmed the birds and animals. It was rustic and lively, and Midas, with his newfound love of all things simple, was completely captivated. Then Apollo took up his golden lyre. The music he produced was on another level entirely. It was complex, harmonious, and so beautiful that the very wind stood still to listen. When they had finished, the judge Tmolus immediately declared Apollo the victor. It wasn't even a close call. The entire audience agreed. All, that is, except Midas. He shot to his feet and loudly protested, declaring the judgment was unfair and that Pan's music was clearly better. Apollo, the god of music, looked at Midas with divine annoyance. He wasn't angry per se, just deeply offended that anyone could have such terrible taste. He told Midas, "The ears that heard such a judgment so poorly must be as dull as the mind of that made it." And with that, Midas's ears began to stretch and grow, sprouting hair and transforming into the long, twitching ears of a donkey. Utterly humiliated, Midas took to wearing a tall turban to hide his shameful deformity from all of his subjects. He managed to keep his secret from everyone except for one person, his barber. The man was sworn to absolute secrecy on pain of death, but the knowledge ate away at him. He was bursting to tell someone. I mean, I would be too. Unable to bear it any longer, the barber went out to a secluded meadow, dug a hole in the ground, leaned down and whispered into the earth, "King Midas has donkey ears." With his burden released, he filled the hole back up and went on his way. But a secret that good can't stay buried forever. A bed of reeds grew on that very spot, and whenever the wind blew through them, they would whisper to anyone passing by, "King Midas has donkey ears." Soon the whole kingdom knew the truth, and Midas's humiliation was complete. Now, I don't allow sponsors, affiliates, or run ads in the middle of these videos because Myth HQ is completely self-funded. I do do have one thing I think you'll like though, and that's my fantasy all access library. It's where you can get all of the mythology inspired fantasy books my team and I have written. They're all set in this huge shared universe where all of the world's mythologies coexist. I think you'll really like it, and it's how I'm able to fund this channel, so check the link below if you're interested. So we have these two famous myths which paint Midas as a greedy, foolish character almost out of a cartoon. But was he just a figure of legend, or was there a real man behind these stories? The answer surprisingly is yes. Midas was almost certainly a real person. Assyrian records from the 8th century BCE mention a powerful ruler named Mita of Mushki, who modern historians widely agreed is the same person as the King Midas of Greek legend. He ruled the wealthy and powerful kingdom of Phrygia from its capital city Gordium in modern-day Turkey. Phrygia's power and wealth were very real. Archaeologists excavating Gordium in the 1950s discovered a massive burial mound over 160 feet high, known as the Midas Mound. Inside they found a log tomb containing the remains of a king and an unbelievable treasure trove of artifacts, intricate bronze vessels, inlaid wooden furniture, and textiles, all pointing to a civilization of immense sophistication and wealth. Dating the wood from this tomb shows it was built around 740 BCE, which means it was likely the tomb of Midas's father, the legendary King Gordius. And yes, that's the same Gordius of the famous Gordian knot. The legend goes that Gordius was a poor peasant who fulfilled an oracle's prophecy by riding into the city on an ox cart and was made king. He then dedicated the cart to Zeus, tying it with an impossibly complex knot. Whoever could undo it would rule all of Asia, a challenge that would wait centuries for Alexander the Great. The historical Midas was a major political player. He formed alliances against the expanding Assyrian Empire and, according to the Greek historian Herodotus, was the first foreign king to make an offering at the sacred oracle of Apollo at Delphi, a magnificent golden throne that Herodotus claimed to have seen himself. So if Midas was a real, powerful, and respected king, why did the myths portray him as such a fool? The answer likely lies in a combination of moral storytelling and cultural propaganda. The Golden Touch myth is a classic cautionary tale about greed, but it also serves as an origin story for the real-life gold deposits in the Pactolus River. The donkey ears myth, on the other hand, works as a lesson in humility, but it might also be a piece of subtle Greek propaganda. By portraying the rich Phrygian king as having barbaric taste in music compared to their own god Apollo, the Greeks were asserting their own cultural superiority over the wealthy eastern neighbors. The real King Midas' story ended not with donkey ears, but with the invasion of his kingdom by Cimmerian nomads around 696 BCE. Faced with the destruction of his kingdom, ancient sources say he took his own life by drinking bull's blood, which was likely a poetic term for a fast-acting poison. Midas is a fascinating case where a real historical monarch was transformed over centuries into a mythological symbol, his life and legacy reshaped into timeless lessons about greed, judgment, and the dangers of offending the gods. Now, if you love diving into worlds like this where all of history's myths and legends are real, then you should definitely check out my private community, the Fantasy All Access Library. It's built on a platform called School, and it's where my core community of readers and myth lovers hang out. So when you join, you get access to my entire library of ebooks and audiobooks, plus at least one brand new novel every single month. We also do weekly live calls where we talk about mythology, writing, fantasy, whatever, and it's the best way to support the channel and get a ton of incredible stories in return. So the link is in the description below if you're interested, and I'll see you in the next video.